Good morning. It's another sunny day in Glasgow, which is nice and a little bit unusual, but it is summer, so we do get some sunny days over here. So I hope you're all well. Today's exercise, picking up from where we were yesterday. What I'm thinking is for today, we'll continue with the chapters. So by now, you should have a three-part outline of what your story is. You should have a word count that you're aiming for as well, and you should roughly have your chapters portioned into those three sections. So for example, 20 chapters for part 1, part 2 and part 3, amounting to about 60 chapters. As a rule, I would probably aim for at least 30 chapters for an entire novel. It varies, it depends on your writing, it depends on the pace of your book. The subject matter can dictate that as well, so don't worry too much if you end up with less than 30 chapters. That's perfectly acceptable too. Some books have no chapters. So it's not, without the realms of possibility for you to do that. You can do anything you like, but I'm just giving you a basic structure and you can then, adhere to it or veer off it at your leisure. Okay, so I guess the next thing is, what is your first chapter? What's it going to be about? So first chapters are really important. They grab the reader's attention. Sometimes if a book doesn't work well enough, readers will lose interest at the end of the first chapter. They won't read on. So in a way, your first chapter is really giving the reader a flavour of what's to come. Now, a lot of writers, will do prologues, and I personally really like prologues because it's a bit like watching a film or a TV program. It's like a pre-title credits sequence, which just gives you a hint and a bit of foreshadowing of what's to come. And those kind of prologues work especially well for crime thrillers, because often they're set in the past before we then begin the main thrust of the novel, which is often in the present. So it almost acts as a kind of flashback, for example. That's just an example of what a prologue can do. One thing I would say is that if you call it prologue, sometimes, I've no idea why, but sometimes readers won't read it. They think it's extraneous. They don't think it matters. I think it's almost like readers, think it's some kind of introduction to the book and it's not actually part of the story. So if you are going to do a prologue, I would potentially suggest that you give it a title. So rather than call it prologue, it would be called something else. It might even just be the date and location, for example. So prologues can be really good. They can draw the reader in. They can be quite low key and quite mysterious, or they can be huge and explosive. They almost act, I think, in some ways like a mini synopsis of the whole book. It just gives the reader that taste of what's to come and draws them in. So your first chapter is very important. And the other thing I would point out about first chapters often, and I think I mentioned this yesterday, often it occurs that there's a tendency for writers, especially debut writers, to try and cram as much as possible into that first chapter. And I would certainly avoid that, because you don't want to introduce too many characters, for example. And I think it was historical fiction I was talking about yesterday, where we had the married couple with their 7 kids, and basically I brought up this analogy: do you really need to know who all the 7 children are in chapter 1? Probably not. So, and especially if those characters are not that important, or you can simply bring them in over the next few chapters and spread them out, which is certainly what you need to do if you have a lot of characters. Historical novels, fantasy novels often have a lot of characters because they're often about family. So you in kingdoms and in estates and things like that. So you tend to have a large cast list. So what you want to do is focus on the most important ones, you know, and make sure that they are fleshed out. And you don't necessarily need to mention every single other character. The other reason for not cramming too many characters into chapter 1 and indeed the early chapters is that you really want to focus on the story. You know, that the characters are you know, they are helping you tell the story. But bear in mind, those early chapters are really just about, you know, hitting the ground running. So that's what you really want to do with that opening chapter. So, I'm not quite awake yet, as you may be able to tell. I've not had my first sip of coffee. Give me 1 second. So and because I'm not quite awake yet, I've had to write things down today as opposed to just thinking this up. So we've got at least 30 chapters. Prologue, what's it going to be about? Are you going to hit the ground running? What are the aims of that first chapter, for example? Focus on the story and cut back on the characters. So that's it for today. Again, I hope these videos are fairly straightforward. I'm just trying to do these in bite-sized chunks because I know how difficult it can be writing your first novel. So what I'm going to do tomorrow is to focus more on character. How do you write characters? You know. Oh, and one other thought I've just had actually about your first chapter, which is that the first chapter should probably end, even if it's a prologue or just the first chapter, whatever you decide, it should end with a bit of a tease, a bit of a cliffhanger moment. You want the reader to read on. That's something I'll probably go into more as we get further along this little course. You're really wanting to end on a little bit of a twist or a tease. You know, it's almost like, you know, an ellipsis. You know, when you read a novel and you get that ... you know, to be continued. You want your book to be as much of a page turner as possible. So I hope that's helpful. I'm going to drink my coffee now and wake up properly, and then I've got lots of editing to do today. So I'm not going to see that sunshine, unfortunately. But anyway, that's the business, that's publishing. I will speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.